Wow! It's amazing to see such a positive reception to the most obscure video game consoles in the world. Seriously, I am truly thankful for the positive feedback and your comments. It inspires me to keep on making videos. Still, I have to make a confession to you. I lied. Those are not the most obscure gaming consoles in human history. In fact, the ones I'm going to mention are so obscure that it's really hard to get any footage of them unless you know someone from that respective country to get them for you. From weird to revolutionary, from experimental to right down illegal. And no, this is no bait. I am serious about this, so please stay with me because we are gonna talk about them. Roll the intro!
With VIS, there's always something good on TV.
Bravo! Bravo! Encore!
To start today's list, we'll talk about the Video Information System, or VIS for short, developed by Tandy and Radio Shack in 1992. This console was released shortly after the global release of the Philips CDI, which was already a huge failure, and just like the CDI, this console also used CD-ROMs. It is fair to say that the games presented for this console were absolutely atrocious, but there's a couple of good things to remark about this console. And by a couple, I mean only one good thing. This console is the only device ever created that ran a special modular version of Windows 3.1. I'm not kidding! This version of Windows was originally intended to be an embedded operating system for various devices, especially those designed to be connected to televisions. However, the VIS is the only known product that actually used this Windows version. This means that whether you are a PC enthusiast or a game console aficionado, this console is sure to raise your interest on a technical level. The greatest questions, however, are: how much did it cost and did it sell well? And my sweet summer child, the fact that you have never heard of this console before already answers your question, but allow me to reply nonetheless. This console was sold at a price of $699, and no, I am not saying that it was sold to the equivalent of $699 nowadays. It was sold at $699 at retail, which would be a total of $1,460 in today's money. If you thought that the console in my previous video were incredibly expensive, then this beats them by a lot. Suffice to say that not only did it not sell well, but very poorly. Around 11,000 units were sold worldwide. The reception was so bad that even Radio Shack store employees jokingly referred to the VIS as a virtually impossible to sell. Tandy discontinued the product in early 1994 and all remaining units were sold to a liquidator. For a console that was meant to be used by the family in the living room, sure seemed more like a luxury object that nobody wanted to use. You could have gotten a Game Boy or a Wonderswan instead and play it in your room. What's a Wonderswan, you say? Well... The Wonderswan is a handheld game console released in Japan by Bandai. It was developed by Gunpei Yoko's company Koto Laboratory and Bandai. Released in Japan in 1999, this 16-bit console released in the 6th console generation intended to compete against the Nintendo Game Boy and the Neo Geo Pocket Color. Contrary to what you may believe, This console is actually a very good competitor against the Nintendo Game Boys at its graphic quality and its accessible price of 4,800 yens. Alongside the support of numerous first-party titles based on licensed anime properties, as well as significant third-party support from developers such as Squaresoft, Namco, Capcom and Banpresto, the Wonderswan was able to sell in its entire history a total of 3.5 million units, which is insane. I mean, think about it. It was competing against the Game Boy, one of the greatest consoles ever made. This was a huge achievement. It was so popular and well received that it got two upgraded versions, the Wonderswan Color and the Wonderswan Crystal. This device was so versatile that it even came with an infrared accessory to transfer data from one device to the other, which is a predecessor to wireless communication between consoles, and this was in 1999. And if that wasn't enough, it was even compatible with Sony's Pocket Station to play a select number of Bandai games. Yes, that other obscure add-on for the PS1, which was only available in Japan. So, you've got well reception from the market, great gaming library, lots of support from developers, versatility to work with other devices, and great processing power. Why did it fall into obscurity? Well, even if you do something great, the market can be cruel against you because of circumstances that are way out of your reach. By the time the developers were about to release the Wonderswan Crystal, the latest and most improved version of the console, Nintendo did not stay silent for long, and a new challenger was born to take the throne by force: the Nintendo Game Boy Advance. Yes, the only reason the Wonderswan was not able to sustain itself in the gaming console market isn't because of mediocrity or lack of power, but because of the popularity of a superior console that dominated the market for many years. If the Game Boy was the god of portable gaming consoles, the Game Boy Advance was the messiah, and nobody could face such deity. Because of that, even though the Wonderswan Color still retailed at a lower price point at 6,800 yen compared to the Advance 9,800 yen, it was still released a year later than the Game Boy Advance and thus could not compete to an already established leader. Bandai discontinued the Wonderswan line in 2003 due to low demand and backed out of producing video game hardware altogether. Still, it's admirable to see how much video game consoles have evolved over the years, and we take it for granted that a while ago, some consoles were only partially portable and some of them did not even have graphics at all, just like the Milton Bradley Microvision.
With Microvision, Milton Bradley's great new handheld electronic game system. Blockbuster, one of the 7 great game cartridges available, comes with the Microvision unit.
Oh boy, had it not been for this one, forget about your Switch, iPhone or any portable device. I need you to close your eyes for a second and think about this. The year is 1979. You see an arcade machine game and you have a good time playing that game. You go back home, go to sleep and think, man, I wish I could keep playing that game anywhere. Suddenly, you pull this bad boy and there you go. The very first portable video game console of all time. You could say it's primitive, that it has aged badly, and that it has nothing interesting, but I disagree. This important piece of history is the sole reason the portable devices nowadays are such a profitable market. It was very limited, with a screen of 16 by 16 pixels. There weren't many games available at that time, and it was sold at a price of $49.99, which would be roughly $202 in today's money. This console was moderately successful, grossing $15 million in its first year of the system's release. However, very few cartridges, a small screen and lack of support from established home video game companies led to its demise in 1981. This console was also limited by the technology of its time, and it was discontinued at a good time because, as you may know, the big gaming crash would happen only a year later. If you needed more evidence of how important this console is, Satoru Okada, the former head of Nintendo's R&D1 department, the Microvision gave birth to the Game Boy, the follow-up to the Game & Watch, after Nintendo designed around Microvision's limitations. Basically, one of the greatest consoles ever created was inspired by this machine. That is a testament to live by. And all of this will not be possible if it weren't for the magic hand of Jay Smith, engineer who worked at Microvision to give birth to this amazing piece of technology. His work was so unstoppable that he would not stop there and proceed to produce later the partially portable Vectrex.
Introducing the revolutionary Vectrex arcade system. No TV set needed. Instead, Vectrex has a real arcade screen built in.
Yeah, I know that you must have seen this console on TikTok and other vintage technology-loving channels and influencers, but bear with me. The reason why I call this console partially portable, even though you needed to plug it into the wall for it to work, is because both the console and the screen were in the same unit. These were the first steps to make a console fully portable. The only missing step was the battery and power issue. Still, sacrificing the absolute portability of the console for a much better designed screen that did not use pixels but vectors instead meant that this era of engineering and experimentation would allow the developers to track issues and find solutions for potential issues in the future. With that said, as experiments go, we were able to see that it had an integrated monochrome CRT monitor, a detachable wired control pad that could be folded into the lower base of the console, and games came with translucent color overlays to place over the screen. Again, there was no conception of what a video game was supposed to be or had to be. In an era such as ours, where companies are so used to be in their comfort zone, with only Nintendo and Steam daring to challenge the norm, it was quite impressive to see consoles daring to try new things. And the pricing of this unit was not ridiculous either. At $199, which would be around $600 in today's money, it was rather affordable, keeping in mind that there was no real concept of how, what or where a console should be. Unfortunately, the console was released in 1983 during the gaming market crash and was not able to be as equally successful as it was ambitious. I like to throw a lot of dirt at companies because it's easy and comfortable, but at the same time I understand why a lot of companies would prefer to stick to the technology they're so used to rather than risk it all in something new they don't even know if it's going to last. After all, the market crash of 1982 meant the demise of a lot of developers and companies, forcing them to create new strategies in which they would only rely on technology that's been around for a while now, such as cartridges and laserdiscs. Oh, and you thought that ROM discs were the first disc format ever used for video games? Well, what about a console that was never released to begin with? Planned to be released in January 1985 by RDI Video System, with initial retail price for the system being $2,500. Yes, retail price of $2,500. It never reached retailers because of the lack of affordable disc players, and fewer than a dozen units are known to exist to this day. With this information at hand, we can discard the questions of price and reception, as this information is unavailable. But what else can be said about this console then? Well, it used laserdiscs, a format that was never even popular and was way too expensive, and that it had a separate speech recognition computer that provided the additional power needed to recognize human speech because the creators wanted to have an artificial intelligence akin to HAL 9000 from 2001: A Space Odyssey. Have you not seen the movie? Do you not see why this is a bad idea? But melodrama aside, it's interesting to think what this console could have been. But still, here's the question. Why would you choose laserdiscs as your format? Well, it was first designed around the RCA capacitance electronic displayer. When RCA cancelled the production of these players prior to the completion of the Halcyon project, it was redesigned to use a laserdisc. One of the biggest obstacles in this redesign, after its significantly higher cost, was the short 30-minute per side capacity of constant angular velocity or random access laserdiscs. Rick Dyer, creator of Dragon's Lair, was one of the many fans of the interactive fiction game Adventure and wanted to develop his own game, Shadowrun, which was an expansive fantasy game inspired by The Lord of the Rings. He envisioned a game that would feature illustrations of every scene and developed a prototype called Secret of the Lost Words, a small section of his larger Shadowrun game that used a roll of printing calculator tape that could be wound forward and backward via microprocessor to show illustrations and information drawn on its surface. Dragon's Lair and Space Ace supplied enough profits and credibility for RTI Video Systems to progress towards realizing their technology into a home entertainment format. But as it was mentioned before, the cost of such machine was so high that the project needed to be stopped and the Halcyon never made it into the market. In my opinion, even though I like risks, you have to be insane to bring your ambition to life if it's going to cost you this much. I mean, other companies were using cartridges, others were experimenting with CD-ROMs, and the rest were trying VCR. Oh, did you not know there are VCR games? First, we have the Action Max. Released in 1987 by Worlds of Wonder, the Action Max system requires the player to also have a VCR, as the console has no way to play the requisite VHS tapes itself. Already off to a bad start there, you needed a VCR and a console for them to work, unlike other consoles where you just needed a TV and the console alone. Using light guns, player shoots at the screen. Gaming is strictly point-based and dependent on shoot accuracy, and as a result, players truly can't win or lose a game. The system's post-launch appeal was limited by this and by the fact that the only real genre on the system were light gun games that played exactly the same way every time, leading to its quick market decline. You can see how this console ended up being forgotten, as in 1994, Nintendo had already released the Zapper, which was an accessory to the NES. You didn't need this to play the console, it was just an add-on for specific games. To put it into perspective, imagine buying an entire console just to play a very small fraction of limited games. It's like if you bought a console and you needed a PC as well in order to play these games. Why would I want to do that to begin with? And you would think that other companies would learn from this, but there was another one that did the exact same thing in the same year, the Video Challenger, developed by Bandai and Takara. It worked the same way as the Action Max and suffered the same fate due to Nintendo's success with the Zapper. It was a no-brainer at this point. Just so you have an idea, between these two consoles there were a total of 12 games. Yeah, 12. 7 for the Video Challenger and 5 for the Action Max. Both tried to use the same exact format and both of them failed the same way in the same year. You can see how a lot of consoles fail due to poor reception, lack of games and terrible knowledge of the market you're targeting. At least the Wonderswan was good on its own despite being overshadowed by the Game Boy Advance. But what about a console that was so bad to begin with and ended up being worse when compared to its competition? And what about a console that is not from the US or Japan? Let me introduce you the Super Akan. Developed by Fontech Dunhuang Technology in Taiwan in 1995. I am a firm believer that any company could get into the gaming market as long as they know how or when to do it, despite not being from the US or Japan. Taiwan tried to take a step forward, but it fell so bad that ended up in one of the saddest stories to this day. The Super Arcane failed because its initial costs were too high for customers. Unfortunately, I do not have the exact information due to the short lifespan of 2 years for this console. Also, it had no chance to compete with 5th generation video game consoles such as the PlayStation, the Nintendo 64 and the Sega Saturn, all of which were more powerful and offered 3D graphics. The Super Arcane performed so poorly that it lost its company, Fontech, over $6 million. In the end, Fontech destroyed all equipment from production and development of the system and sold all of the remaining systems to the United States as scrap parts. It only had a total of 12 games, and 11 more were in production before its demise, ended up in obscurity and failure. To be fair, Fontech never had anything to get inspiration from and started this project from scratch. With little to no prior knowledge or experience in the market, it was unfortunately inevitable to happen. But it's not always like that, mind you. There are some consoles who had prior knowledge of the console market and still failed as well, such as the Sega and FM Towns Marty. Oh, you don't know what I'm talking about? Well, allow me to tell you then. Sega is a video game company founded in... I'm just kidding. Let's talk about this obscure little fella.
CD の数だけ番組が増える学べる遊べるみんなに楽しい富士通の FM タウンズマーティー新登場
今ならすぐに使える体験 CD がもらえるよ
FM Towns Marty was developed by Fujitsu in 1993 exclusively for the Japanese market. It often claimed to be the first 32-bit CD-based home video game system, although it has a 16-bit data bus, just like the earlier Commodore CD-TV and Sega CD. The console came complete with a built-in CD-ROM drive and disk drive. Before proceeding, a little bit of context here. Fujitsu specialized itself in the manufacture and development of personal computers for the Japanese market in the 80s and decided to tackle on the console war with a version of its PC transformed into a video game console. Despite having excellent hardware from a gameplay perspective, both the FM Towns and the FM Towns Marty were very poor sellers in Japan for being expensive, a total of 98,000 yen or $710 at retail, and the custom hardware meant expandability was not as easy as with DOS/V systems. You also need to keep in mind that a year later after this console was released, the Sony PlayStation would hit the market in December 3rd of 1994, and in 1995, the FM Towns Marty was discontinued for good. And there you have it, some of the most obscure consoles that... Oh, you thought this was over? Oh no, my man. I've got one of the most interesting stories to tell you.
Me está llevando la cara de Edu. ¿Con qué estás jugando?
Con esto
No, hermano, no. ¿Qué me haces? Electrolab es ahora. Electrolab Ending Man. Para un cachito. Toma, pibe, prueba con esto.
Electrolab Ending Man. El otro nivel en videojuegos. Electrolab se juega con vos.
One that involves the NES and that is called the famiclones, or family game in this case. Of course, copies of consoles that can play games is nothing new in today's market, but what if I told you that this specific clone was not only successful, but even more popular than the original NES in South America? Family Game, obvious clone of the Japanese Famicom, was not only an exact replica when it comes to processing power and compatibility with NES cartridges, but it was also widely distributed by official companies. Yes, just like you heard, companies were using Nintendo's design without their consent, made a profit out of it, and still managed to stay relevant in the market for years to come. This famiclone had many names in different countries, such as Dynavision in Brazil, Creación in Colombia, NASA in Chile, and the most famous one, Family Game by Electrolab in Argentina. As you can see, the models look almost identical, and except for a few differences here and there, if you were born in the 80s and never saw a Nintendo system before, you would actually think this is the real deal. And if that wasn't enough, it could play both the original games and the replicated cartridges too. To avoid legal issues in the future, Electrolab also proceeded to redesign the family game console to make it look like a completely different thing, but keeping the exact same infrastructure that allowed it to play Nintendo games. Now, even though I do not support stealing the design from an original brand, the NES in South America was seen more as a luxury item rather than an accessible piece of technology. If you were raised in Latin America, you would know that having a friend that had an original Nintendo console, an original SNES or N64 meant to you, wow, this guy must be rich. So having this alternative allowed millions of kids in the continent to have their first approach to gaming. Had it not been for this console, boys and girls raised in the 80s and 90s would have never experienced what it was like to play a video game other than in an arcade. So, despite the legal issues and controversies regarding the existence of this clone, which also appeared in other countries such as Russia, Yugoslavia and India, it is important to remember that it was a device that allowed kids like me to game at home for the first time ever. And now, for real, there you have it, the most obscure consoles in the world. There could be some more I'm missing that could lead to a final video of this topic. Maybe an obscure console from a specific country perhaps? You let me know in the comments. But with that aside, I would like to finish this video with another note. Due to my 8 to 5 job, I don't have much time to make videos such as this one, and I have to say that I enjoy doing this a lot. The fact that I can entertain, have people interact with each other and create interesting content for you means a lot to me, and it would mean a lot more if I could make this my official job. For that to happen, I need to reach 1,000 subscribers and a lot of watching hours. So, if it's not too much to ask, I would be eternally grateful if you could like, comment and subscribe, as it wouldn't be just a confidence boost for my channel, you would be helping me do this for a living, which is something I'm trying to achieve. Earn a living doing something you love. With that said, I truly appreciate your support and time. This has been Juano and I'll see you in the next video. Have a lovely week.